Back in second.
Have a jury, please.
All rise for the jury.
Everybody be seated, please. Your next representative.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent, we were talking about your 302 from June 23rd, 2016.
Yes.
You have it in front of you, right?
Yes, I do now.
Now, during the course of your investigation, you received from the Tallahassee Police Department a response to a subpoena sent to Apple for records of Luis Rivera, right?
Correct.
And they respond back with 2 phone numbers.
Go ahead and ask your question.
They respond back with 2 phone numbers, right?
Correct.
Now, you put that in your report.
That's correct.
And the source of the information that's in your report were the documents that were sent and the data that was sent from Apple, right?
I believe it was the documents, the subscriber information.
It's the same one, sorry. Agent, I'm handing you a picture marked as Magbano 25. Take a look at that. You know what that is, right?
Yeah, I believe that's the records they send in response.
Now, you know that those are the records that they sent in response because you received it from Investigator Isom, you reviewed it, you used it to put together your report, right?
That's correct.
And you know that it applies to Luis Rivera because of the documentation and what was given to you along with it, the subpoena and whatnot, right?
That's correct.
And that printout fairly and accurately depicts what one would see online with what you used to put together your report, right?
See online?
Let me rephrase that, a little jumbled.
Okay.
That printout looks the same as what it would look like if you pulled it up on a computer, right?
Okay, yes.
Move in what's been pre-marked as Magbano 25.
Objection, hearsay, and authentication.
Not introduced to the truth of the matter, Your Honor.
Sustain the objection.
Investigator, in your report, for the phone numbers that you have for Luis Rivera, you do not have the phone number 305-934-6615. Right?
It's not on my report, no.
There is a phone number, but it's 1 digit different, right?
Objection, call for hearsay.
I think the inquiry is as to information he has of Mr. Rivera. Is that the question? From Mr. Rivera.
Correct, Your Honor.
I'll overrule the objection as that question.
Agent, during your investigation, the phone number that you find out belonging to Luis Rivera is 305-935-6615, right?
Correct.
Not 305-934-6615, right?
I don't recall.
Is the phone number with 934 in your report?
I sustain that hearsay objection.
Let's go to the gun now. It's a murder weapon, right?
Yes.
You've stopped searching for it.
Correct.
There were a few attempts made, right?
Yeah, a couple of extensive attempts.
High altitude plane for South Florida, but just a few attempts to find the murder weapon up here, right?
I spent days looking for it, yes.
It was never found.
No.
Now, the only information that you had, the only person to help you find it, was Luis Rivera, right?
Correct.
Now, you talked about yesterday about the route that he took you on, right?
Correct.
Now, he also drew you a picture too, right?
We went on a route that the cell site data showed us they went on.
But when it came to stopping at bridges, you had no evidence that it was actually dumped in a body of water, right?
No.
For all you know, it's in a slab of concrete in Miami.
Could be.
The only thing that you had to go on was Luis Rivera saying we dumped it on the trip back, and then you cross-referenced it with the route that they took with their cell phones, right?
That's correct. That looks like it's,
You smile as you're looking at it.
yes.
It's not a good drawing, is it?
No.
It's almost laughable.
It's opinion, yes.
Perhaps Luis Rivera did not want you to find the gun. That's possible, right?
Not in my opinion, it's not what happened.
Let's talk about that. You're also a federal agent.
Yes.
There's a potential on a case like this that it could become a federal case, right?
Yes.
Now, you would agree with me that, and I'm going to get into the legalese here, that the federal government can prosecute a case that's already been prosecuted in state court. The same thing. They're
That's
considered
my-
separate sovereigns.
That's my understanding, yes.
And on many of your federal investigations, in many ways that you end up getting jurisdiction to prosecute a case is on interstate commerce, right?
Correct.
So what would be like an armed robbery case, a Hobbs Act robbery, right?
Yes.
You know what Hobbs Act robbery is, right?
Yes, what's the question?
If there is a gun that's used in that, and that gun can be tied to interstate commerce, if the gun was produced in Cleveland, that's interstate commerce, you can prosecute in federal court.
Yes.
Meaning Luis Rivera, if the gun were found, and it could be tied to interstate commerce, could be prosecuted in federal court, right?
Possibly, yes.
Most gun manufacturers are outside of the state of Florida.
Correct.
And again, this is a guy that when he's cooperating, he's already a federal inmate
That's correct.
with a lot of guys that have had cases dealing with interstate commerce. Right?
Correct.
Who is Cecilia Magbanua?
I believe that's Miss McManus' mother.
Now we're going to go back to the topic of money into Catherine Magbanua's account. During your investigation, you see that there are monies being transferred to Catherine at the time in her 20s from her mother, giving her money, right?
Correct.
You never interviewed Cecilia Magbanua, right?
No,
She's located down in South Florida, right?
she was.
You say was because during this prosecution, she passed away.
Correct.
Objection, relevance.
It's already been asked and answered. The objection's not timely.
She passed away during this
I
process.
sustain the objection at this point in time.
Okay. Never interviewed her, right?
No.
Let's talk about evidence of innocence, of Catherine's innocence. Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera are arrested. You would agree with me that there was lots of media.
Yes.
Catherine didn't flee, right?
I believe she did.
Wouldn't flee mean she's gone?
Flee means she left her apartment that we had a camera on, and she stopped using her cell phone and would not respond to us. We tried to contact her, and she wouldn't respond.
You're talking about the one time that, not yourself, but that two men went and knocked on her door and didn't identify themselves as law enforcement. That's the time you're talking about, right?
With their badges showing, and she knew they were law enforcement.
You don't know if she knew that.
She said it on the phone.
You can't say that she knew why they were there, right? You can't say that. Whether it was for Sigfredo Garcia, right?
Right?
You can't say that.
No.
And you can't say that the reason why she moved out of her apartment is because now the person that she was sharing it with has been arrested by you and she can't pay for it.
This happened before she was arrested. This happened after I spoke with Mr. Garcia. Then they left the apartment.
Let me give you the reference points again. Sigfredo Garcia, Luis Rivera are arrested, right? There's lots of media. During that time, she moves out of the apartment, right?
No, that's not correct.
But wasn't that the reason why you said she fled?
She moved out of the apartment before he was arrested.
All right. At some point in between May of 2016 and her arrest in October, the actual probable cause affidavits, meaning the paperwork that explains everything, signed by a judge to arrest somebody, that's released in the media. You know about that, right?
I heard about it, yes.
Didn't flee. Right?
What's your definition of flee?
Getting on a plane and leaving the country. She didn't do that, did
She
she?
didn't leave the country, no.
Didn't leave the state.
Nope.
Didn't leave the county of Miami-Dade.
Disagree with that.
She went to Broward, which is the next county over,
Yes,
sort of like going from here to Jefferson.
yes,
So that's your definition. She went to Hideout
yes,
down the street.
yes, she did.
Before her arrest, there was also a 2020 special. You know about that, right?
I've heard about it.
This prosecutor, Ms. Kappelman, she appeared on it.
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
Ms. Kappelman appeared on it, was interviewed, and talked about the case. You remember that, right?
I didn't see the episode, but I heard about it.
And that it talked about Catherine McBano's involvement, right?
I don't know what it said.
One brief moment, Your Honor. Let's sum up the theory here. And Your Honor, to let you know, it's
We're not going to recap if that's what you're about
No,
to
no, no,
do,
it's not.
Mr. DeCoste.
not a recap. Just want to let you know that I think this time it will be about 5 minutes.
But we're still not going to just go back and summarize what you've already asked.
Not a
If you have a
summary.
new question, ask a new question.
Just giving Your Honor a time reference.
I'm not cared about your timeline.
Okay,
I'm caring
okay,
that
then we'll
it's a
keep it
new
moving.
question
We'll keep it
that we've
moving.
not covered.
During the course of your investigation, you learn that Catherine McBano and Charles Adelson take a trip to Key West, right?
Yes,
And you learned during that investigation that it was considered by Charles to be the goodbye tour.
no, I didn't learn that.
You would agree with me that during the time of June and July of 2014, that Charles Adelson and Catherine McBano will break up
We had indications of that weren't positive. Yes,
before the homicide.
yes.
What evidence do you have? What evidence do you have that this wasn't all an agreement between Charles Adelson and Secreto Garcia?
That's a summary question. That's not an appropriate question. Do you have a new question, Mr. DeCoste?
I'll ask you a hypothetical. Charles Adelson is communicating with Secreto Garcia. One wants his brother-in-law murdered, the other one wants the girl that he loves back. The exchange is $100,000 in the murder. In exchange, I'll break up with a girlfriend. What evidence do you have that says that that didn't happen?
Objection.
Sustained.
And again, the breakup happened right when the murder happened, right?
I don't know that.
1 second, Your Honor. Nothing further, Judge.
Redirect.
Publishing Defense 21. You were asked about this check from Club Fate.
Yes,
Were you aware that this check bounced out of Ms. McBano's account?
no, it was not.
All right, and this check is for the amount of $985.62.
Correct.
We heard testimony that Ms. McBano worked about 2 nights a week at the clubs. How many nights would that be for the period of this?
Objection, mischaracterization of testimony. Lack
Sustained
of personal
objection.
knowledge.
All right, if she was working for a month, isn't that what the memo line indicates?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Does the memo line indicate she was being paid for about a month, $985 for the
That's-
month of April?
That's correct.
All right. And if she worked 8 nights during the month of April, that would be about $123 a night, correct?
Objection, speculation as to how many nights you worked in each given month.
Overruled.
If she worked 8 nights in the month of April, that would be about $123 a night, correct?
That's correct.
And apparently Club Fate, since the memo indicates that this is
Objection,
for...
leading and counsel testifying.
Overruled.
since the memo line indicates that this $985.62 is paid to Catherine McBanoa for tips, then Club Fate apparently does not pay for tips in cash.
That's correct.
Objection
Alright.
calls for speculation.
Overruled.
And is there anything about this check that accounts for the spike in cash income around the time of the homicide as shown in State's Exhibit 118?
Objection. Personal knowledge calls for narrative and speculation.
Overruled.
Can that check explain this spike?
No, it cannot.
You were asked about, basically, do you have any evidence to indicate that Ms. McBanoa was not employed at the Adelson Institute? Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
All right, and you mentioned a couple things, but the employees there did not know what it was that she did there, correct?
Objection. Personal knowledge and hearsay.
Judge, the witness was asked what evidence he had.
Well, let's clarify what his knowledge is. I'll overrule the objection, but there needs to be a foundation. And let's not lead your own witness, please.
Did you go into the Adelson Institute?
Yes, I did.
Did you inquire of the employees there what it was that Ms. McBanoa did there?
Yes, I did.
And were those employees Ms. Labredo and Erica Johnson?
Yes, they were.
And were those witnesses able to give you any explanation as what, if anything, Ms. McBanoa did for that business?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Overruled.
Were Ms. Labredo and Ms. Johnson able to shed any light as to what, if anything, it is that Ms. McBanoa did for the Adelson Institute?
No, they were not.
And you received or reviewed some employment records from the Adelson Institute as well?
Yes, I did.
The exhibit that's in evidence here today?
Yes.
All right, and did that exhibit shed any light on what it was that Ms. McBanoa was doing for the Adelson Institute?
No, it did not.
And you were shown some texts. I'm going to show you what I've marked as State's Exhibit 185.
Sheriff, we can go sidebar.
Agent, please take a moment to review State's Exhibit 185 and advise if you recognize it.
Yes, I do recognize it.
Is that a text thread from Mr. Adelson's iCloud?
Yes, it is.
And is it a fair and accurate depiction of the text thread?
Yes, it is.
And who is the conversation between?
Between Charlie Adelson and Catherine McBanoa.
On what date?
The date is 11/6 of 2014.
Judge, at this time I'd ask to introduce an evidence States 185.
Subject to my prior ruling, it will be admitted.
Defense asks for a recross on that one exhibit.
I may hear what the discussion is before I rule on it. You may.
You could read us the text thread and tell us who's saying what. Did you see that?
Yes. I'm sorry, you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. Just the body?
Yes, and tell us who's
Okay.
saying what.
from Charlie Adelson, put that you work in the office, not at home. Then response from Ms. Magmama is, no shit, Sherlock. Then Ms. Magmama again says, LOL. Then she says again, I don't know pay period dates. Can you call me? I'm driving. Mr. Adelson responds, our pay period is Monday through Monday.
That would have been an exchange that occurred after Ms. McBanoa began receiving paychecks from the Adelson Institute.
That's correct.
All right. You were asked about, on the wire calls, and particularly in reference to the bump, you were asked basically questions about the flyer and how do we know that there was really $5,000 written on the flyer, correct?
Correct.
And did you say that the wire calls contain the amount $5,000?
Yes, there was some wire conversation about 5,000.
All right, and is that an amount that was reported in those first 3 calls between Donna Adelson and Charlie Adelson?
Between Donna and Charlie, I don't recall exactly if it was in
Okay.
those 3 or not.
All right. You were asked about the issue of the legitimacy of Mr. Charlie Adelson contacting Catherine Magbanua after the bump.
Right.
All right. So there were a lot of questions about her ex-girlfriend, and isn't it natural that he would have contacted Catherine Magbanua because she was his ex-girlfriend?
Correct.
All right. And isn't it true that on the calls, Mr. Adelson indicates he's got 87 ex-girlfriends?
Correct.
Objection, facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
And that's in call D that has been introduced into evidence. Would you agree with that?
I agree.
Okay.
And I do recall earlier question also.
All right. And so we watched the bump video, and the undercover does say Katie. You were asked about Catherine, but it's actually Katie, correct?
Correct.
That the undercover says to Mrs. Adelson.
That's correct.
Does Mrs. Adelson in any of those calls that preceded, okay, I want to know about the calls between Donna Adelson and Charlie Adelson before Charlie Adelson calls Catherine Magbanua. You understand what the time period I'm asking about?
Yes, 3 calls.
During those calls, does Mrs. Adelson tell Charlie Adelson that the undercover said Katie?
Objection, hearsay, court's prior ruling.
Overruled.
Do you understand the question?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I know it's
Yes.
convoluted.
No, it's fine. She does not say Katie. She never says the name Katie.
So when Charlie Adelson first contacts Catherine Magbanua, all he knows is that the undercover mentioned ex-girlfriend, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, Judge, at this time I would ask to move into evidence the calls listed as A, B, and C.
I'm not going to revisit my ruling at this point in time.
How many of the 87 ex-girlfriends did Mr. Adelson contact after talking to his mother about the bump?
Only one.
And who was that?
Catherine Magbanua.
You were asked about whether there's any evidence of contact between Charlie Adelson and Sigfredo Garcia. You recall that?
Yes.
All right, and we do have the one unanswered call from Sigfredo Garcia to Harvey Adelson on July 1st, 2014, right?
That's correct.
Okay, that's not the same thing as Charlie Adelson.
Correct.
Okay. And it was suggested that that call could have had something to do with this interaction about the jet ski. Do you remember being asked about that?
I do.
All right. And if the call to Charlie, okay, strike that. If the call from Sigfredo Garcia to Harvey Adelson on July 1st had to do with Charlie Adelson trying to confront, strike, got to start over. Okay. If the call on July 1st, 2014, from Sigfredo Garcia to Harvey Adelson, the one that was the link that we got from the Tower Dome,
Correct.
if that call was, as has been suggested, Sigfredo Garcia angry about the relationship between Charlie and Katie, trying to confront Charles Adelson. Wouldn't that indicate that Sigfredo Garcia did not have contact with Charlie Adelson prior to that?
Objection, speculation.
I think it calls for speculation.
All right.
Sustain the objection.
But the first murder trip occurred prior to that July 1 call. Happened in June, right?
That's correct.
And the murder didn't happen that trip.
That's true.
But whoever hired these guys to go kill Dan Markel did it before July 1st.
Exactly.
Objection, still speculation.
Overruled.
Do you have any evidence through the entire investigation of any communication between Charlie Adelson and any Latin King?
None.
Is, in your experience, is a drug buyer and seller relationship, does that usually have some type of phone communication associated with it?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
Yes, absolutely.
And we didn't see any such communication between Charlie and any Latin King drug seller.
That's correct. None.
Was there anything unusual about the procedure that was used to arrest Catherine Magbanua?
No, absolutely not.
Was it a typical show of force for the
Objection,
arrest of a
motion to
suspect?
eliminate.
We'll have to get sidebar on that.
Was the show of force employed in the arrest of Ms. Magbanua a typical show of force for the arrest of a murder suspect?
That's correct.
And you were asked about your opinion as to whether or not Charlie Adelson believed that the undercover in the bump was a law enforcement officer. Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay, and you said no, your belief was that he was just trying to assuage his mother, that it wasn't going to be a problem.
Correct.
Okay. And does call I on State's Exhibit 138 illustrate your belief?
Yes.
Judge, at this time I'd ask to move in and publish call I of State's 138.
Is there still objection to I?
Absolutely, Your Honor.
I'm not going to revisit my ruling.
You were asked about Luis Rivera's arrest around our operative time frame, so June and July of 2014, remember that?
Yes.
And you were shown a Chase account that lists the Normandy address as his address. Do you recall that?
Correct.
Did Luis Rivera tell you where he was staying at the time of the arrest? Not the
Objection,
arrest.
hearsay.
Strike
Overruled.
that. Did Luis Rivera tell you where he was staying around the time of the two murder trips?
Yes.
And where was that?
That was at his girlfriend's apartment, Jessica Rivera. Jessica
Rodriguez?
Rodriguez.
Okay.
And it was on 135th.
All right. And Jessica, did we also look at Luis Rivera's phone location information to indicate that he was physically laying his head at Jessica Rodriguez's residence around that time?
Yes, we did.
All right. And on September 17th, 2015, did law enforcement respond to that address?
Yes, they did.
And what was that in reference to?
Domestic.
Domestic between who?
Mr. Rivera and Jessica Rodriguez.
All right, so both the two of them were there on 9/17 of 15.
Correct.
You were asked about your efforts to look for the gun and was suggested that maybe you should have used a high altitude plane to look for the gun. Is that something that you think might have been helpful?
No, not at all.
All right, but you did go to the area where Mr. Rivera indicated the gun may be and do your best efforts to look for the gun in that
Objection,
location.
lead-in.
Overruled.
Yes, we did.
Okay. Whether or not the gun was recovered, could Luis Rivera have been prosecuted in federal court?
Objection, personal knowledge.
Overruled.
I'm sorry.
I mean, he could have been prosecuted for murder in federal court, couldn't he?
Yes,
Whether or
absolutely.
not you had a gun.
Absolutely.
No further questions.
I'll allow recross on limited to State's Exhibit 185. Anything? All right.
Agent, showing government 185. He said, put that you work in the office, not at home, right?
Right.
Not put that you work in the office. Right?
Objection confusing?
Legal objection?
I think the question's been asked and answered. Do you have another question, Mr. DeCosta?
Your Honor, I actually haven't got an answer to it.
Oh, I thought he said that, it said, put that you work in the office, not at home. Did you not answer that question?
That's what it says, yes.
All right, we've got an answer. Move on, Mr. DeCosta.
This answer, put that you work in the office, would indicate that it was all a sham.
We're not going to speculate on what it meant. Move on, Mr. DeCosta. Or further? All right. Any further, Ms. Kaplan?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Ready for lunch? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Questions. I always forgot. I'm sorry. All right. So, go sidebar. Did you look at any tax information as to Ms. Magbanowa? In other words, 1040s on Ms. Magbanowa?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. And were there W-2s for Ms. Magbanowa from the bars and nightclubs and Adelson Institute?
Not that I recall about the bars, the Adelson Institute. There were some records.
Make sure you speak what they can hear you. I know I'm asking the question. It's a little awkward. But
Sorry.
so there were some W-2s from the Adelson Institute, but you don't recall any from the bars or nightclubs.
That's correct.
And were the bars from the nightclubs? I'm sorry. Was the cash from the bars, nightclubs, or other income shown on Ms. Magbanowa's 1040s?
No, that was not claimed.
What's that?
No, that was not claimed.
Did the Adelson Institute pay unemployment tax or reemployment tax on Ms. Magbanowa?
From my recollection, I believe they did pay some taxes on it. Yes.
Did you look at any employment records for Mr. Garcia?
I don't believe I found any other than when he was working at Rapid Capital, so I did not get their employment records.
So you didn't see anything from Coastal Masonry?
I'm sorry, we did get something from Coastal Masonry too.
And
Short period.
did they report their wages?
They did.
Did you attempt to match that with what went into Mr. Garcia's bank account?
Yes, we did.
Now, did you have bank records for Mr. Garcia back in the 2014 time?
I believe so. I believe we did.
Were there any searches made of any residences to search for the gun?
No, they were not.
Now you were asked about the show of force in terms of arresting Miss Magbanua. Was a similar show of force used as the arrest of Mr. Garcia?
Yes, it was.
And I don't know whether you have ready access to this, but do you know how many times the undercover number was called?
It was less than a handful.
Do you have some record of that?
I might be able to refer back. I believe, from my recollection, Charlie called it once, Mr. Adelson called it once, Mr. Garcia called it one time and got the voicemail, and Mrs. Adelson called it once. I think she might have called twice.
Mrs. Adelson, who?
Donna Adelson called it twice. She called one time and didn't reach him, and then she returned the call, I believe. So possibly a total of 4. I could be mistaken on that, but around 4.
Any follow-up from the state?
When did Donna Adelson call the undercover? Actually, better question would be if you could give us all of those calls and the dates of who called each time. Would that take you time, or can you?
I might be able to pull that up pretty quickly, I hope. So Mr. Adelson, Charlie Adelson called the undercover on 4/28.
Can you say that again? Especially, I can hear you.
I'm sorry. Mr. Adelson, Charlie Adelson called the undercover on 4/28 of 16. Do have on 5/6 is when Donna Adelson called the undercover agent and got his voicemail. The UCE actually tried to call her back, she didn't answer, and then she calls him back on the same date, all on 5/6 of 16. And the date that Mr. Garcia called. I don't think I have that, but let me make sure.
That's one in evidence.
It is one in evidence, yes, sir. I think it was on the 28th also, because that's when he got the voicemail. That's when Mr. Garcia called the undercovers on 4/28 of 16.
All right, and so since Charlie Adelson's call was on 4/28 and Mr. Garcia's was, could you give us the times?
Yes. So Charlie called the undercover agent at 11:33 a.m. and Mr. Garcia called just prior to, it was around 2:00 p.m. that afternoon.
Thank you. No further questions.
Just for the record, that is called, the undercover call by, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Yep. Garcia.
Special Agent, the call for Sigfredo Garcia that you have on 428, that came from a handset associated with Mr. Garcia, correct?
I believe so.
Okay.
No, I don't recall exactly which handset it came from. I don't recall off the top of my head.
Well, the reason why I'm asking that question is because there's no actual voicemail left, correct?
Correct, there's no voicemail.
Okay, so you don't know who actually picked up the phone that on the handset that belonged to Mr. Garcia and made that call, correct?
Correct.
And at that time was Mr. Garcia, who was he staying with at that time?
He was staying with Miss McBalma.
Vanilla.
Are you done?
Yes.
Agent, you were asked questions about tax and employment information for bars and clubs.
Correct.
There's no bars involved here, it's just nightclubs, right?
Sure, the two nightclubs you brought up earlier.
Hollywood Live and Club Fit.
Okay.
You were asked about employment documentation. Were subpoenas ever sent to either of these companies, these nightclubs, to get any documentation?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
You were asked about the communications between the undercover. Correct me if I'm wrong, there was also a text message that was sent by the undercover to Donna Adelson in the middle of the night.
That's correct.
Have you brought that up yet?
I don't recall if I have or not.
You have the body of that message?
Not with me.
It was a threatening message?
Threatening? No, not really. I mean, somewhat, but
Somewhat threatening?
somewhat, yes.
Turn your attention now to the arrest of Sigfredo Garcia.
Okay.
You remember being asked about that a minute ago?
Yes.
All right. With respect to Miss Magbanwa, and this ties into the same topic, you remember at one point when the state attorney's office was trying to litigate over her medical records.
Okay.
You were present for that
For
at times.
for the hearing, I'm not sure what you're asking me. Present for what?
Were you ever so this hearing, you know of the time frame, right?
The hearing of the actual hearing of
It was like right before her arrest.
Okay, no, I'm not familiar with.
A couple of months before her arrest, would that sound right?
I'm not sure.
All
I
right.
don't recall.
Were you ever made aware that she was willing to voluntarily surrender?
No.
All right. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Redirect. Scaffold.
You were asked about the call from Mr. Garcia to the undercover, and that was on 4/28 around 2 o'clock, you said.
Yes.
All right, and he didn't leave a voicemail, so we can't prove that was him that called the UC, was the idea.
Right.
With me so far?
Yes.
All right, there was a call which was admitted into evidence, LL. And
Correct.
who is on that call?
It's Mr. Garcia.
All right, and at what time, that's on 4/28 as well, correct?
That's correct.
So about 9 minutes after well, I guess I need to ask you first, what time was LL placed?
2:09 p.m.
All right, so about 9 minutes after the hang-up call to the undercover.
That's correct.
No further questions.
And I misspoke when I said the Garcia call was in evidence. I was mixed up with the Charlie Adelson call to the undercover is the one that's in evidence. So I misspoke. You can step down, Agent Sanford. There were two legal questions asked that I have to deal with legal questions. It's not for the witness to deal with. It asked whether the video of Mr. Rivera in custody was in evidence, and the answer to that, it is not. And the follow-up question to that was, why is the Rivera interview video considered hearsay, but the phone calls from the wiretap are not considered hearsay? And let me say, hearsay is a very complicated subject. There are books and books written on hearsay. There are law school classes on hearsay. You cannot become a hearsay expert today. There are approximately 30 exceptions to the hearsay rule. There are circumstances where hearsay does not apply. So just accept that you're not going to become an expert on hearsay based upon your involvement in this trial. But in general, the hearsay, it is not hearsay when somebody takes somebody's statement and presents it against them. But it is hearsay if that person who is making the conversation tries to use it back. I know that's a little confusing, but in other words, if it's being used against someone, it is not hearsay. It is, if it's trying to be used by the person, it is hearsay. That's a little confusing. As I said, as to Mr. Rivera's statements, what he said that was inconsistent with what he said in court is admissible against him, but not everything he says is admissible in court. So that probably just fuels your confusion, but that's what I get paid to try to sort out, and done my best to do so. So anyway, y'all have a good lunch. Let's be back at 1:30, please. Either side have any issues? See y'all at 1:30.
It's gonna be unplugged.